Order this meeting of the Champaign County Board Data Center Activities Task Force. Somebody please call the roll. Folks, we're beginning. We're about to call the roll. Can we go ahead and just read the roll, please?
Rodriguez.
Here.
McCrory McKay. Esri.
Here.
Young.
Present.
Rain.
Here.
Rice. Sage.
Here.
Newell. Aris.
Here. Okay, with the quorum present, we can now move forward with our agenda. Can I get a motion for the approval of the agenda?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. All opposed, same
Aye.
sign. Okay, with an agenda confirmed, we can now move on to new business. So this is going to give kind of a heads up on what we're doing tonight. We're doing public participation a little bit differently, so please pay attention. But before I begin that, I want to start with some reminders, right? This is a meeting that's focused on eliciting public input, right, from the public, from people in Champaign County on our data center policy. We've had several meetings that are focused by topic, right? So on water, energy use, that sort of thing. And we're now at the stage where we have a working draft where we can now take suggestions from the public. So a reminder, these are things that we've kind of covered throughout, but I just want to make it really, really clear. The county cannot institute a complete ban on data centers. We do not have the legal authority to ban data centers. I want to make that really clear. So this is not an issue of will. It is about legal authority. As a non-home rule governmental entity, the county does not have the legal authority to ban a specific industry. Further, these sections of the data center ordinance draft mirror and solar draft our wind and solar county ordinance, so the public is welcome to comment on them during public comment at the end of the meeting, but the task force won't be discussing these during this meeting tonight. That is drainage in section E. That is use of public streets, section F. That is local fire protection, section G. Operations and standard conditions, section P. And the complaint hotline, section Q. Okay, now to what you can expect from our meeting tonight. Again, we're structuring this a little bit differently, and the goal here is to get as much detailed comment as possible. So we're breaking this down by portion of the ordinance, and we're hoping to get feedback on each portion. Then we'll have an opportunity for broad public comment at the end of the meeting. So some more details here. First, we're going to hear on a particular section from the Planning and Zoning Director, John Hall. He's going to review the language and the draft proposed for each section. We're also going to have an opportunity for any task force members to ask questions. Those in the audience can follow along with the order and the language on the handout provided at the front table. So be sure to jot down any comments or concerns that you might have during that portion and focus your comments on that portion of the ordinance. After we've completed those sections, I'm so sorry. In those comment sections that are focused on an individual portion of the ordinance, we're going to request that you restrict your comments to 2 minutes. So speakers may speak once per topic, but on as many sections as you desire. You do not need to fill out a slip to comment on one of these portions, these sections of public comment that are focused on the ordinance. Okay, to ensure, a couple more suggestions here. To ensure that we have time for everyone to speak, your comments have already been, if your comment has already been stated by a previous speaker, you can simply state your support for what the previous speaker said. The task force may engage in dialogue with public comment during this portion of the agenda. During the standard public input section later in the agenda, speakers will have 5 minutes, and the task force will not be engaging with the speakers. One last thing before we begin, there is no draft language pertaining to noise or vibration to review at this meeting. We are continuing to reach out to subject matter experts before putting forward the proposed language. So again, we don't have anything on noise or vibration to review. We expect to have something after we've heard from some experts. We've just had some trouble with scheduling. Okay, and with that, do we have any questions from the task force about the progression of the meeting and what to expect? Okay, seems like we're on. Yep.
So just to be clear, we're going to go through sections of the ordinance. Members of the public will have a chance to ask section by section questions specific to that section. And then at the end of all of it, after we've gone through those sections, there will be general public comment about sort of anything related to this. Is that
That's
a
correct.
correct characterization? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, with that said, I turn it over to John Hall.
Thank you. I plan to mainly follow the handout, but we can put any of this material up on the screen if folks would like to see it on the screen so you could speak to actual sections. First of all is where allowed and what approval is required. We're proposing to allow Big Data Center as a county board approved special use permit in the Ag 1, Ag 2, and I-1 light industry zoning districts. We expect it's going to be a use that wants to be somewhat remote from the urbanized area because of noise and other things like that, but it still wants to be close enough so that it's not completely rural. And so we think those mix of zoning districts will serve their purpose. And if the data center ever closes down, the county will be in a strong position as to what can come next. If we locate them in a rural area and they close down, then they're going to have to go through another approval process for whatever would take the place of the data center. So that's the first section, is just a county board special use permit. It's the most complex kind of an approval that our zoning ordinance allows. Any comments on that?
Now on? All right. My name's Chris Powers. I'm from Rantoul. On page A3 of the proposed ordinance, under minimum lot standards, item 2 says there is no maximum lot area requirement on best prime farmland. Can you define what best prime farmland is and why there's no maximum lot area?
Best prime farmland is the most common kind of soils in Champaign County. About 60% of the county is best prime farmland. Best prime farmland is a Champaign County term. The USDA doesn't use that.
What term do they use?
Prime farmland.
Well, what term do you use under what allowed types of agriculture? Citing.
Well, best prime farmland. And the reason we're not going to limit the amount of best prime farmland is it's almost certainly going to be on best prime farmland because that's where most of the energy infrastructure is located, and not allowing it on best prime farmland would be the same thing as not allowing it at all.
Okay. Will there be any bond or some sort of a trust or whatever required for when this thing does close down, quantum computing is coming, they won't need 100,000 square feet or 1,000,000 square feet to do quantum computing. They can do that like that in a cigar box. So what's going to happen to this giant eyesore when they're done with it?
Well, the committee discussed that. They discussed whether or not a decommissioning requirement should be part of the amendment. And it was felt that by the time you place these large buildings on farmland, you can't really recover the farmland after that. And it would be best to plan to reuse that for some other use, warehousing or something like that.
Just start a new town in the middle of nowhere?
Well, hopefully not in the middle of nowhere, but it's
Well,
going to be at the
That's
outskirts.
prime farmland. You know, why isn't there a plan that they have to demolish this? I would rather see them try to return this to farmland. Good Lord, it could be done with enough effort.
Could we keep comments on decommissioning, I think, towards the end? Because I think we're focusing this on that particular section, right, on where we're building. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
But unbuilding it seems like a natural part of that.
On where we build? Okay. I think just for ease and for understanding, I also see a public input slip here that's on that same topic. That's one reason why I'm suggesting it.
Okay,
But I mean, if you have anything
Thank you.
on where it's built, we're happy to hear.
thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Again, this section is 5.2. So, okay.
Farmland is an irreplaceable resource, and we're already concerned about how much good prime farmland we're losing just by processes of erosion, runoff, and other questionable, some of the questionable agricultural practices that we're trying to work to improve, hopefully. If you've read Jeremy Rifkin's The Age of Resilience, there's a big move toward bioregionalism. We need to look at the resources for our region and the needs for our region. And I don't know why you would allow a data center of questionable value to the public and the community to be anywhere near good prime farmland or other areas of nature. Thank you.
Could we get your name? I'm so sorry.
Excuse me, I had one question I forgot, and that is, why is there no maximum area for these? You guys can't imagine a number that maybe it should be smaller than that? Like smaller than the state of Illinois or Champaign County, or what are we getting at here? How big? Why is there no maximum? You guys could develop a number for that.
Yeah, Aaron.
Sir, we have no formal proposals in front of us, and we have no idea how big of a data center, should a hyperscale data center ever be proposed in the county. We have no idea how big they'll propose.
Well,
They may say 200 acres. They may
don't
say
wait for them to-
1,200 acres. So we have no idea.
maybe not wait for them to propose it, but imagine that number, because whatever it is, it's going to be whatever, as big as they want, but it may not be as small as this county needs.
We also have the idea that they can ask for a waiver on anything. So if we said 5 acres was the maximum, they could come in and ask for a waiver for 200 acres.
Is that legally required, or is that just something the task force?
They can always ask for a waiver
Why?
because they can.
By law?
I can't point to you where in the law it is, but I don't know how it would be if we can't truly ban them. And
No,
they
but you
want to
can
come in
set
with
a
a true
maximum.
proposal. What does it hurt that they can actually ask? How can you ban them from actually asking? Okay, you say, and again, I'm just going to go to my numbers, and they're just theoretical. you say you can't have more than 5 acres, but I want to build 200 acres. Why does it hurt? How can you keep them from at least asking that?
You can't keep them from asking, but you can set the limit ahead of time in black and white. My goodness.
Can I maybe bring up some points here? All right. So we chose to focus on wattage rather than size for some practical reasons, right? Imagine a skyscraper AI center. You could build it on a limited amount of land and just build up, right? So we're focused on the output because you have a reason to kind of categorize as far as what the scale is going to be with that data center. That's the reason why. A limit would, again, you could easily get around a limit by building a skyscraper. Andrew, do you want to comment here?
I just have a question. Have we ever done has the county in any of the ordinances had a maximum lot size? Is that defined anywhere?
For most uses in the ag districts, it's 3 acres or larger than 35. So even our maximum lot size allows something larger than 35 acres, and there is no limit beyond that.
Would also like to state that we also are looking at requiring, it's in the draft ordinance, requiring them to provide some of their own power, which would most likely be in the idea of a solar farm. I believe it's 50% is what we have in the draft ordinance. Well, what's to say that they wouldn't want to come in with, we want to provide our own 100% power. So that would take even more land. So again, I don't know how you practically can truly set a cap on the upper end of what they at least ask. And if they ask us for a waiver, then it would be up to us to decide whether we would grant them a waiver in terms of us being the county board ultimately.
Okay, next, we've got a limited amount of time here, all right? Could we hear, yes, I've got it, thank you, Jen. Could we hear your name first and then move forward?
Oh, okay. My name is George Hardebeck. I just live on the outside of the city right up here in the county. And I guess, it really comes down to, I mean, if we really take the temperature of not just the room, but the whole region and what people are feeling about this altogether, there should be, the assessment should be based on what people are feeling about data centers in general and how we need to limit them in terms of space, yes, but maybe putting things off, if not saying, okay, we're not going to say no, but we're going to say, okay, we need to assess this. We have a university here with people enthused about looking into understanding what the limitations need to be. We're in a perfect position to help lead some of this as a county within the nation that could really help to assess this. And first question we should be asking is, how much do we need? How much do we need for a data center? Is it, are we just giving into, prime greed addictions, desire to gamble, to be the first big data centers to make the most money, and if it fails, they don't care because they're going to get some kind of a write-off or something. We really need to look at the science of all that, including that kind of addiction, and how we've allowed for thousands of years to have imperial systems that enable that addiction when we need to move into a mutual society, which is what we decided in the first place for claiming this country. Which we got from our indigenous, but I won't go too much in depth. But anyway, so I mean, it really, if we just get into our guts a little bit on this and feel it out, like what makes sense, it really comes down to all of us not just giving into what we've been pushed into by bullies, skimming money off the top of everybody else and hoarding that money addictively to be able to have power over others and take advantage of everybody else, to then take all the energy and take all the water and contaminate the water and so on, which I know is in some of the other parts of this whole conversation. But, but we're giving into them to a degree that when we're at a time when we're passing trigger points of no return on this planet, we're giving into more use of energy, more carbon in the air, all of this stuff, which we don't need to. We need to take the time to assess this and decide what do we really need and how are we going to set that up and make it something that is adequate to the capacity of our human sense to move forward in a healthy direction for well-being as true capital in our world. Thank you.
So this is, I have the uncomfortable task tonight of keeping us on task and focused on the agenda. That means I'm going to have to cut people off at times. I just want to give everyone a heads up. It's also my job to make sure that public comment in these sections are on topic. Remember, we're focusing this portion of our public comment on each section. So we are still on where are data centers allowed and what approval is required. And I want to pause and ask if John has any further information before we take more input. Okay, again, 2 minutes for this section, and please keep it focused to where data centers should be built and what approval is required.
Okay, my name is Amy Hatch. I'm a Champaign resident, and I don't do public speaking, but this is a big deal, so I'm here. We're talking about the size, where they're built. Prime farmland, that is some of the best farmland in the world. There's a reason that the Church of Latter-day Saints is the largest landowner here. China's buying our land, billionaires. Your current draft, big data center, is defined as at least 10,000 square feet of processing area or a total power rating of 24 to 36 megawatts or greater. 1,000 square feet is 100 feet by 100 feet, which may not seem that large. However, in the US currently, the largest hyperscale data center campuses span more than 1,200 acres. 10,000 square feet fits into 1,200 acres over 5,000 times. I think we all need to understand the size. 200 acres is not, I think that's misleading, not intentionally so, but the average size, and they're growing. There's a 1,500 acre one by Meta going up in Lebanon, Indiana. So there's one in rural Indiana by Amazon. It's 1,200 acres. Texas has one. It's designed to hold 10 data centers on 1,200 acres. People are proposing larger ones. You mentioned wattage and power. So just quick thing about that, the 24 megawatts, that can power roughly 18,000 to 20,000 typical homes at any given moment. The 36 megawatts.
I'm so sorry. We're going to focus power on a different section.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just speaking to when you mentioned wattage, so 25,000 to 30,000 homes on the maximum is concerning. So 1,200 acres in the United States is currently the average mega campus size that they're going for. They can get even bigger than that. China is putting them in where they are 11 football fields long by 15 football fields wide. That is humongous. That's 10.7 million square feet. So there's a reason that some of us would like to have caps on the size and where it's located, the farmland.
Thank you. Did we get her name? Did we get her name? I'm so sorry. The person who spoke previously, did we get your name? Amy Hatch. Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Good
If you could
evening.
begin with your name.
My name is Dee Huckel from Champaign. And first of all, I want to thank this committee. I didn't realize you guys didn't get a little bit of money for all this. So your time, thank you for giving your knowledge, your time, and effort for this. It's appreciated. I just have a few things to say. First of all, I got on reliable report that any data center wouldn't be any closer to any person or business living 1,000 feet. Now that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? It's a fifth of a mile. How far does sound travel? I'm not a scientist, I don't know, but I'm guessing 1,000 feet certainly doesn't make them more quiet in your area. Also, what I hear is we're talking about approvals. Why can't we decide what we would accept in a data center? Everything, all the way from how much land, how big they would be, the wattage usage, everything that we would find maybe useful or maybe approval. But we're letting here, it feels like we're sitting here waiting for them to take the shot. They'll say, well, we want this, well, we want that, we want this, and a lot of arguing. If you went to sell your home, would you just let people come in and go through your home without knowing how much you wanted or what your things were? No, you'd set it up with a realtor so that you could be getting everything down. So the person coming and looking at your home would actually know, okay, they want this much money. It's this kind of a house. This is the taxes. We're not doing that. We're sitting here waiting for them to start proposing stuff. And it's like I say, it's just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. So that's my opinion. Oh, one more thing, water. That's my
Next, there's
Can't
another
say
section.
water.
Another
I'll
section.
be back.
Okay, thank you. You can do that. Okay. So any more for specifically where a data center would be allowed, so location, and what approval is required? Yes. Come on up and please state your name.
Hi, Sally McConkey. I live in the city of Champaign, and I have a question. It seems like what I'm reading here is very prescriptive about what's allowed, and there's obviously a lot of thought that's gone into what are the limits. But I wondered if any consideration has been given to requiring an environmental and societal impact statement, a study from them. Have them tell us what they look, and I think one gentleman before mentioned the University of Illinois, that we've got great resources they could tap into. And it would be, I think, a very good idea to have an impact statement from them looking at all these different factors. And I wondered if that had been considered or debated. Thank you.
We'd be happy to bring that up in the section that we could. Or do we have an answer? Do we want to address that, requiring an impact study on societal impacts? Okay, we can move forward. Yeah, go for it.
I just want to say, I'm here to hear what people think about the permit, not defend it necessarily, right? Like, I think that our goal is to get input. So if somebody has an idea that they want to share, I don't think we have to litigate yes or no at this moment. In fact, I think that would probably not be a good process.
I certainly agree. Yeah. Yes, Amy.
Just to address George's remark and Sally's remark, I did talk with the dean at the Granger College of Engineering about this meeting 4 days ago. I invited him to this meeting last week. He had a prior engagement. He also sent me a summary of what the college is doing. I wasn't super encouraged by that. They had 2 seminars series on this. So if you would like more university input, I highly encourage you to call and or email, and I'm happy to provide that information to you after this meeting.
Any more on specifically where a data center should be allowed and what approval should be required? Okay, yeah.
I've got an actual question. I noticed in the actual language, the zones are ag, general business, and light industry, and then in the summary, it's different. Do you know which one of those is the intended version? On page B1.
Yeah. So what's there on B1 mirrors what we already allow for small data centers. And the reason and actually that's, I think the ag one in the handout is an error, Andrew, because we hadn't proposed having it in ag one in that. It was mirroring the small data centers, ag 2, B4, and I1.
Okay.
So that handout, I don't know how that error got in there, but I'll correct that.
Thank you.
I suspect that most will actually end up being in ag 2 because it's the rural district that's closest to the municipalities, closest to where the energy is available. So.
Okay, are we now ready for the next section? Not in one section. Is that right? Yes, I believe that's what we established.
If I can put this, when we talk about the loss of prime farmland, how much farmland are being used, if you want to make that argument, the amount that is lost to housing developments dwarfs this. The biggest data center you ever heard of is not a drop in the water compared to what we lose to housing developments around here every year. So I don't know, if that's a concern, then, that's going to be the argument. You could use that argument against any type of industrial growth, but at the same time, it's, they're going to come back and say, then if that's what you're worried about, why do you allow, thousands of acres to be converted into housing? Well,
Next section. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we are now moving on to the minimum separations. Again, I apologize. It's an uncomfortable position. I just got to keep us rolling tonight, folks. If we want to get to public comment here, which is I know what you guys are all eager for, if we keep us going, then we can get to that section at a reasonable hour. Okay, next section. So this is minimum separations. So this is section 6.17C. This requires at least 1,000 feet separation between big data centers, structures, and the nearest non-participating principal building under other ownership. So the distance between a data center and another unit. Mr. Hall.
That's right, although it can be longer if necessary to meet the noise limits, which we're still working on. And I know some task force members have asked for a separation from outdoor gathering areas. We haven't yet had a chance to get that in here. I assume that would still be 1,000 feet. So that's what we're looking at.
Any comments on that section? So again, the subject is the minimum separations between a data center and another building. Could you start with your name?
Hi, my name is Cele, C-E-L-E, Otnes, O-T-N-E-S. I live in the county. Strongly, is that an on? I appreciate what you just said about how this 1,000-foot separation is not set in stone because it might change due to the noise, vibrate. And I think that you should make sure you have got some research that looks at not only, I read a very frightening article about the noise that we can hear, but the noise that we really can't hear, the noise that's kind of under, and all of the damage that kind of noise can cause to humans and animals. And if we're going to be And so if you're going to set a limit, I would hope that it would be a limit that would be based on research that would have looked at the entire noise spectrum. So this is not really about noise, which I know we're not talking about tonight. This is about distance, which of course they're intertwined. So please work very diligently to find a researcher or someone who can, or get someone to, because I think there's a lot of literature out there already, to do their due diligence to understand that 1,000 minimum is probably not going to be sufficient to take care of all of these aspects of the noise spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we maybe get some more insight or thoughts on how we determined? Before we get into comments from the board, maybe just a rule of thumb, right? I would consider, right, we've had about 5 meetings so far for us to talk at the public, right? So sources of or points of information would be helpful, or giving insight on how we arrived at a particular portion of the ordinance would be helpful. But right, this is the public's time to speak to us. It's not quite debate hour. Does that make sense? Does that sound reasonable to everyone? Again, the emphasis is on the public. Okay, John, do we have any? What's that? Oh, okay. John, do we have any? How did we arrive at 1,000 hours? Yeah, feet. Yeah.
We're working on 1,000 hours. Now, the 1,000 feet separation came from the city of Aurora, and the city of Aurora uses 1,000 feet separation if there are no backup power generators. I don't know what they, or no, they use that if there are backup power generators. So that was our starting point. The city of Aurora has the largest separation that I could find in the state of Illinois. And so that's why we started with that. And I am trying to find more information about how that relates to the noise level, but I'm not a noise modeler, so it's difficult to get that. But I'm trying to find someone who can help us with that.
Thank you. And Andrew, did you have a comment? I think I skipped you.
Yeah, just wanted to provide the context on the sound that, we have been talking about sound and we just need to do more work, but just some of the protections that we had talked about were modeling ahead of time and after the fact having testing to verify and then an ongoing testing and complaint structure so that the county would have the resources it needed to ensure that the data center wasn't in violation. And that, just to say, I know we're still working on it, but just so folks know, that's kind of where that's at. So that's where an additional setback based on sound might emerge from a sound study that says, this is going to need to be longer. I know that's not set in stone, but I just wanted to make sure folks knew that that's sort of, because it does tie into the setback pretty critically as like, this is the minimum setback, not the maximum setback.
Thank you. Okay, so again, we are still on minimum separations. Could you begin with your name again?
Sure. My name is Chris Powers. I'm from Rantoul. So my question overlaps separations and siting. What happens to the county roads that are at various intervals and you put a data center in that might be half a mile long? Because I noticed that there's no particular form that these things have to take. They could be as long or as wide as the board allows. So what are you going to do about county roads or other roads and forcing people to drive around these things? I'll wait for the answer.
We're going to require a road use agreement that has to be signed by the highway commissioner or road use authority so that we'll know that the road use authority is agreeing to what's proposed.
I think we are going to flesh that out in the future, right? So that's section F. It's one of the use of public streets. So we're going to get to that section eventually. Not tonight, but at a future date. But I just wanted to add, if you're noticing you'd like more detail, more details are coming. Anything additional?
Yeah, just also for reference, that's a standard part of our ordinance anyway. Any project would have to account for any potential impact or change or maintenance to a road if suddenly the road was going to have more traffic on it or larger traffic or something along those lines. So that is something that is consistently considered when providing any permit to any type of structure.
Okay, thank you. So another comment? Okay.
So 1,000 feet, it was mentioned that the city of Aurora was sort of the model for that. Sound carries out in the country rurally a lot farther, and 1,000 feet, I'm not a mathematician, but what is that, around 3 football fields? It's not very far. It also, we're not a city. We want to maintain the rural character of our county. The noise is a big deal. These data centers usually can and do operate 24 hours a day. Cooling equipment, transformers, generators, other machinery. And I mean, we need independent studies on this. Absolutely, at least one, because families who live out there, they shouldn't have to wait until after construction or after it's built to find out whether their noise predictions were accurate. We need in advance, clear, objective, enforceable standards, including projections for nighttime and low frequency noise was mentioned, which can be very dangerous. Independent testing and reliable monitoring needs to become part of the draft, I think. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, minimum separations? Oh, once per section, I'm so sorry.
I just want to add a little bit of info for you. It's not a question.
Once per section,
It's
I'm so sorry.
Sound decreases
Okay,
at the square of the distance.
thank you.
So
Got it. Okay. The next section that we have are backup power generators. So this is section 617D. So I'm going to go ahead and read over this. So section 617D A requires a backup power generators to meet the EPA's final Tier 4 emission standards. B, and prohibit roof-mounted generators, and all backup power generators must be equipped with vibration insulation systems and critical grade mufflers and sound attenuating enclosures. Point E, limit testing of backup test generators between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., not on the weekends, so Monday through Friday. And then finally, a limit to limiting backup power operation to bona fide power outages or testing. And so I'm not sure if my pages are the same as yours, but I'm going off of the summary of the handout. Right, so it's section
It's B5, page B5 in your multi-page handout.
Thank you. Okay, so we're focusing on backup power generators.
Hi.
Could you start with your name?
Yes, Karen Kane, Kane. I live in Champaign. And my concern is that the language in 7F is not restrictive enough. It states backup power generators shall only operate during bona fide power outages or during testing. So my question is, what will be considered bona fide power outages? It could easily happen that there's insufficient electricity in the grid to power the data center on a regular basis, in which case they'll have to resort to the gas and diesel turbines, and that's not acceptable. So I think there need to be some more specific restrictions about, when they can be used, how long, and yeah. So.
Thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you.
Mm-hmm. Please begin with your name.
Hi, my name is Gabby Del Santo. I live in Champaign. I was just concerned about section 617D, the 7A, requires backup power generators to meet the EPA's final Tier 4 emission standards. I was just wondering, I have two questions. One, where in the draft ordinance that is specifically mentioned? When I just did a search of the document, I couldn't find where that was mentioned. And then second, we're currently seeing a giant gutting of the EPA by the EPA to limit things. So I was wondering if there is a specific reason that you guys mentioned these Tier 4 emission standards instead of maybe writing out exactly what you would want those emission standards to be.
Do we have any insight on that, or are we moving forward? Okay, we'll move forward.
I think the question about where the standards are, I believe the answer, like those are in the probably in the EPA Act, but so you'd have to find that online. It's not like embedded here, but your point about what happens if they gut that is well taken. Thank you. Okay.
Hello, Stuart Levy in Southwest Champaign. I just wanted to support Karen Kane's comment about what's the definition of an outage, because one of the things, if the Power Act passes, and I hope that it will, one of the things that it provides for is, let's see, it gives incentives to, in effect, to data centers that commission as much renewable power as to equal their average power utilization. But if they're not as forthcoming as that, then they might get cut off by the grid when the grid needs power. When the grid is scarce, they can only get a guarantee of as big a fraction of the power as their renewable supplies would cover, if you see what I mean. So they might, in times of stress, have lots of power outages, more than the rest of us would have. They might be preferentially cut off if this act passes. And I hope our ordinance will not let them get away with running backup generators just because they were cheap on providing their own power. Thank you.
Sorry you see my face all the time. It's not very pretty. But going along with that, there should be a cap on how much time or energy or carbon emission or something on these backup generators, because they're not going to be renewable. They're going to be gas. They're going to be gas-fired like Elon Musk does in Memphis, blowing through all the environmental rules down there. So there needs to be an enumeration of things, not just relying, like she said, on EPA, because even if they don't rewrite it, they're not going to enforce it. In fact, they're probably going to promulgate other rules instead. So if they haven't already. Tied in with that is that later, and this is really closely aligned with a later section where it states that they have to be able to rely on, I think, renewable backup power for 15 minutes. But that's not stated about like 15 minutes per what period? Per day? Per hour? Per year? That should be much higher in the first place, that number. And there should be a cap on how much those gas-fired generators run. Period. If they can't manage that, then they need to add more solar to their roofs.
Thank you.
I just had a specific.
Please begin with your name.
Sorry, my name is Mika Raviv. I'm a resident of Champaign, city of Champaign. I was wondering specifically, I didn't see any language about temporary generators, and I know that they're like, I'm a bit concerned about the enforcement of this specific section in terms of other types of generators, like facilities and developers could. I feel like there's nothing stopping a company from bringing in a bunch of portable or like rental generators by renaming them as that instead of like backup generators, and then using that for an extended period while calling that temporary. And if so, would it be possible to include an extended or like more explicit definition of all the different types of generators, like rentals, temporary, portable, supplemental, emergency, bridge power, and prime power generators as well. I just think there's a lot of different scenarios where a grid connection might be delayed or there's too much demand or demand surges, and there could be different like labels onto the generators that would create a loophole with this.
You.
Hi, my name is Brianna Davis. I'm a resident of Champaign. I have a question kind of about like extended power outages. I, not too long ago, a couple years ago, was in a power outage that lasted over a week. And if there's any like limits on how long they can use those backup generators for in those instances, especially considering that they might the data centers themselves might overwhelm our grid. So that would then obviously create a loophole where they could just run the backup generators forever. So if there's any like amount of time that we have to like limit or what counts as like an extended amount of time for the backup generator used for a power outage.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Amy.
Is it okay if I talk now, or is it only for the public to talk?
We can't, again, we're keeping it as points of like information. We do have a section, right, future where we're, yes.
Oh, I had a question
No,
if,
go ahead.
about this. So I'm just wondering, in if it would satisfy several of the concerns, if we could split the phrase in F, it says backup power generators shall only operate during bona fide power outages or during testing. I'm also concerned about testing because they could, a business could say, oh, we're doing this kind of testing, or we're doing load testing, or we're doing some other kind of testing. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to split those two things apart and give a maximum number of hours per year for testing and a maximum number of hours for power outages as well, or other emergencies. So I feel like we just need to be more specific in that, in those cases.
Okay, any other comments on backup generators? Okay, seeing none, we can now move on to the next section. Again, we're skipping vibration standards and allowable noise levels for a future meeting because we have not yet heard from an expert. We do plan to. Our next section is on screening. So this is section 617L, which requires perimeter fencing and screening if visible from any dwelling within 1,000 feet. And John, did you have any details to add about this or thoughts?
No, I would just note that many jurisdictions actually require landscaping standards. They specify how many coniferous trees, how many deciduous trees, how many low-story shrub trees, how many other kinds of vegetation. We don't have anything like that. And so, you know, if the public thinks it's important that this screening needs to look a certain way, we need to do a lot of work on what we have, because this is just a bare bones screening that we use for solar farms. And that ends up just being a row of evergreen trees. So.
Thank you. Okay, so again, please begin with your name.
Seal Otness. Thank you. That speaks directly to what my question was. This is my own ignorance. What is screening? You know, I don't know what screening means. And I also am interested in the cloak and daggerness of fencing. I mean, is the fencing wire fencing that people can see what's going on behind in the data center, or is it fencing that helps sort of, you know, shield the sort of non-beautiful nature of these data centers, but also allows them to operate without sort of transparency, if you will, that we can't see what's going on? So, and to your point about specifying what kind of landscaping might serve, I guess that's part of the answer of what screening is. I think that might be an opportunity for us to put a little sustainability in this clause. Maybe some natural plants, some kind of ecological contribution. I'm just throwing that out there, having heard your comment 2 seconds ago. I don't know how the public feels, but I'm sure you'll find out. Thank you.
Any other comments on screens? Please begin with your name.
Hello, I'm Bruce. I live in Urbana. So the screening section, I think, would be a good place to bring up light pollution. So using the solar panel regulations doesn't really work because the solar panels don't produce a lot of light pollution. Data centers do. I was reading through other ordinances that include that the external light fixtures should be in compliance with the International Dark Sky regulations. Yeah, light pollution has lots of effects on migrating wildlife. Champaign-Urbana is a big hotspot for especially songbird migration. So I think in the screening section, adding some light pollution guidelines could be beneficial.
Please begin with your name, and again, we're focusing on screens.
Screening, right. So screening, so in the general context of this, if we think about...
your name, sir.
It's on screening. Can you hear me?
Your name?
George Hardebeck.
There you go.
And yeah, just north of the city in the county. In the general context of this, if we think of rights are about what is right, they can be intrinsic rights and they can be rights for nature, rights for ecology, and rights for us as people, right? Whereas otherwise they're wrongs. And it depends on how we recognize that and we make it into, maybe constituting even locally, like in the rights of nature, community rights, rights of nature movement, which can be applied to all of this. How we address this instead of feeling like we don't have the permission to do all this and we have to go by certain criteria that are applied to housing and so on and so forth, when all of this generally is causing a huge debt to humanity and ecology. And if we go with letting them have these big things instead of smaller centers that are networked all over the place, and so on, in a way that we determine is actually healthy and going towards well-being for all of us on the planet, which we should be shooting for. So generally that, so what would be, what would be an improvement in terms of the screening? And we might even go back into the last, comments on what would be an improvement in terms of the ecology, in terms of climate and all of this. How could they be improving that instead of taking away more? Because they're obviously going to take away a lot. So, we need to make it go the other direction. If we're going to give them the privilege of using our space that we are responsible for and the other humans that we're responsible and the life we're responsible for on this planet as human beings of this generation, then maybe we can be thinking about how the screening can be an enhancement of the local ecology to take us back out of the mass extinction that we are in, which is also based on land use as well as climate change. And there's plenty that we can all address with that in studies through the university again as well and other resources we have in the area, and maybe, make sure that that's enhanced so that, and also, just back for a moment when it comes to the energy use, they could be required to take care of all of that themselves and add to the energy, green energy that we have in our system to be a larger, healthier grid in the most healthy way possible. And that would be right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Any other comments on screening? So section 617. Okay. We have N next. It's the next section, N. That's one section that we're delaying, right? We're focusing on, next section is water use and cooling. Just one moment. Do we have any comments or points of information from the board, or from the task force on screens? Thoughts? Seeing none, we can now move on to the next section, so 617N. This is on water use and cooling. So the first provision, it limits the use of water for cooling to closed-loop cooling systems. I'm going to ask John for a definition for that in just a second. We've also said no evaporative chillers, adiabatic coolers, evaporative coolers, or open cell cooling towers shall be allowed. Next, requires a maximum water usage effectiveness of 0.2. 0.2.
It's liters per kilowatt hour, I think, or some metric like that.
Okay, thank you. Requires an estimate of water use to be included with the special use permit application and a water withdrawal plan detailing proposed groundwater withdrawals and water use. And then also requires an annual report on water usage to be submitted to the County Board Environmental and Land Use Committee. John, do you have any thoughts or key definitions there that you'd like to add?
No.
Okay, could we get a definition for evaporative cooling system and what we're talking about?
Well, the intent is to not allow evaporative cooling systems, but to closed loop so that the cooling water just recycles and, you fill it up once and then you may have to top it off periodically, but the intent is it's closed. That's all the water you're going to use for cooling.
Thank you. So this is, again, an attempt to reduce the water usage, right, by forbidding these other forms of cooling. All right. Could you again begin with your name and then your comment in 2 minutes?
Chris Powers. So Section N doesn't define a maximum for well draw. It says they're supposed to submit reports about this and that. Answer questions on their special use permit application, that sort of thing. But there's no maximum water usage defined in this, and that's a huge, huge mistake. Closest it comes, and this is not very close, it says an annual report on water usage shall be submitted to the Environment and Land Use Committee. The report shall explain the amount of total direct water use for cooling the processors, et cetera, et cetera. So total direct water use is kind of a squirrely term. I've heard it used before, and mostly it's in relation to communities that complain that total direct water use advertised in advance of construction of these data centers doesn't nearly capture the actual total water use. Total direct water use, that's one thing. That has to do with cooling processors. But the total water use could be 2, 3, 4, 5 times that. And so you need to pin that down a little bit better. Button that up, because you don't want them drawing as much as the village of Rantoul on a daily basis. I particularly picked out my own town because we have a pork processing plant, and that plant alone accounts for 50% of the water use of Rantoul. So imagine what a data center could do.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other comments on water use and cooling? Yes, Amy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Thank you. Please begin with your name.
Ann Berger. I've been told my voice doesn't carry, but I'm from Urbana. And I would like to take up just a bit where this gentleman left off. According to the Wall Street Journal, in 2025, all three of the major companies, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, chose not to report the indirect usage, water usage, that is the usage that comes from the electric power plants that are feeding them. They only reported the indirect water use, which is what this gentleman was saying. That is water that is used right there on site. Again, according to the New York Times, the figures for that indirect water usage in the power plants that they're responsible for are on average 10 to 12 times larger than the numbers for the direct water use. So my question here is, as years pass, will we get an accurate picture of how the data center is affecting Central Illinois' water supply? As of right now, there seems to be no laws directing that both kinds of water usage need to be reported. I could not tell from this whether you all had specified that. I couldn't find anything that said both kinds of water usage would be reported. The other thing, the current administration has fast-tracked environmental reviews by rescinding a number of regulations established by the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. And what I want to know is, can the county legally require the data center to meet regular review requirements, monitoring about, toxic chemicals in the water and so forth, even if NEPA no longer mandates them? Can county rules override federal rules? I don't know. The Supreme Court has ruled that federal agencies can ignore foreseeable environmental harms, letting the agency, the involved agency, pick and choose what impacts to study and which they will ignore, no matter, quote, no matter what the communities say. So what I want to know is, what if the potential harm that people here are worried about is not one that the agency chooses to monitor and study? And finally, I fear we could be left without a voice in these major decisions because the current administration has made changes in NEPA that curtail citizen participation, like repealing public notification and public comment periods. Again, can the county rules on that you all come up with override those? So I guess what I'm feeling like is
2 minutes.
Okay. Yep. So anyway, can the laws that you all have come up with, the regulations that you choose to pass, can they withstand the barrage of federal attacks that things like this are under now? Thank you.
Again, if you could just, as a rule, even if you've spoken before, begin with your name. It helps us for note-taking. Yep.
Amy Hatch. I'm a resident of Champaign, Illinois, the city of Champaign. Water, I think, deserves particularly careful study before any approval because many, if not all, residents depend on private wells in addition to, our aquifer. The draft does have some strong provisions, including the closed-loop cooling requirements, restrictions on the evaporative chillers and so on. However, the draft still contemplates groundwater use and does not appear to establish a sufficient protective absolute limit on groundwater withdrawal or how that would be measured and monitored and how it would be enforced. The county needs to obtain credible independent studies, hydrological studies, not just experts coming to talk to you guys, that's great, but actual studies. I lost my spot. Before approving it, these studies, because this materially affects groundwater resources for the entire county as well as surrounding counties. It should establish enforceable withdrawal limits, monitoring requirements, protections for neighboring wells, clearly defined remedies if a data center causes or contributes to a loss of water availability or water quality. Water resources should be demonstrated to be adequate prior to any construction, not studied after residents have problems. Thanks.
Hi again, George Hardebeck, north of the city and county. So I think, we also need to have a category for water abuse, and especially in terms of contamination and how do we deal with that? And when we're dealing with permitting, if they can keep asking for further permits, then we need to be able to, say, well, we're going to set up language that says that in the future, if we get more information about when something is harmful, that we can make them responsible for what they're harming now that we have that information. And just a little quick on the community rights of nature movement. It's about putting people's community and nature over corporations' property and commerce, because our founding lawyers set up in the property and commerce clause, and this went around the world after that, to put property and commerce, including people as property and life as property and commerce, over federal, over state, over local governments. So this started at a township level, this movement in Pennsylvania, then it got picked up after a while by Ecuador at a national level because the indigenous were pushing it. It fit with them being pre to post imperial, and they understood all that a lot more. So they've been leading it around the world, and it's thought of as by the UN as global key reform, or holistic reform, meaning it's cross-sector, across all kinds of sectors. So there's that, and there's global, or the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which I think we should all be looking at too. These are all coming out of needs of our time. This is about what's happening to the needs of our time. These guys are actually reacting to us mutualizing, which is what we were trying to do in the first place. and they're, they're paying for these sort of dictators du jour to like mess all this up further again so they can be in their great last grab end game of greed's long game. Thank you.
Hey again, Stuart Levy of Champaign. First, a question: are we talking about effluent as well as intake in this section? Yes. Okay. Good. Let's see. One question was about where the 0.2 liter per kilowatt hour came from. So I tried working out what how much water would you need for an evaporative cooler, and it looks like it's maybe about 10 times that. So are we really only getting about 10? Are we really only expecting about 10%, about tenfold better than evaporative cooling in this standard? So where did that magic number come from? That's the one question. A comment, I guess, about maybe a scale for people to think about what water use might mean. On the 0.2 liter per kilowatt hour scale, then a 200 megawatt data center, so a medium-sized one, but we might get a bunch of those if we're unlucky, would be about 250,000 gallons a day limit, which the last I heard is maybe about 1% of Champaign-Urbana's water usage. So if we get a bunch of those, it could be a significant part of our water usage. The other part is looking at other model ordinances. So this ordinance does a bunch of things saying, that we need to certify that the water use will be minimal and so on. But that's part among the language in it. But one of the other ones says this. No data center shall be approved unless the applicant demonstrates that there is an adequate supply of water for the proposed use, and that proposed water withdrawals and discharges will not endanger or adversely affect the quantity or quality of groundwater supplies or surface waters in the vicinity. So that's a different sort of a requirement. And it's a little bit like what the Power Act would require if it passes, but it might or might not happen. So I thought that could be a good thing to apply. Let's see. I guess another thing about effluent, if I could have a few more moments, is we don't really know what it's going to contain. It's probably going to be a trade secret. It may well contain PFAS, as others have mentioned elsewhere. And so I don't know how we get a good hold over what's going to happen to the effluent water, and how can we tell whether it's going to be troublesome as it goes into whatever other water systems it's going to go to. Thank you.
Seal, Otness, Urbana Township. I just had two comments. One is that I don't think the issue of how much water has been used during the construction process is addressed. And this can be quite substantial given the size. I was just looking at some of the stuff online about this, and they just mentioned, for example, creating concrete requires quite a lot of water. So we need to consider, should there be regulations or some kinds of guidelines about the way water is used during the construction process? The other question I have is this annual report on water usage for 6.1.7N5. I would love it to see, or ask the board to please, task force to please consider using some language about having independent auditors when such annual reports are supplied, because we know what internal annual reports can, if there are no eyes on that other than the ones that they have on there, that they know they're trying to stick within certain regulations, there's really no accountability. So that's it.
Hello, I'm Lincoln from Urbana. Two issues with the water section. First, regarding the water usage. Because data centers are such like at least of these scale and of these type are so new and a kind of a developing industry, I think it's fair that at this point we can intervene and ask them to aim their technological development towards efficiency. So for future, whether it's renewing their permit or as a part of further water use of those annual water use studies, increasing that efficiency demand in the future, whether it be by the decade, by the year, to encourage them to expand their technology in that direction. Additionally, regarding effluent, the effluent limitations in the existing ordinance reference the NPDS, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which is also an EPA regulation. So it may be important to have fallbacks. As we know, the EPA is under variable enforcement depending on the administration and is being kind of taken out from the inside at the moment. So it might be helpful to have redundancy in our own ordinance. In addition, one of the issues that has been discussed is PFAS as an effluent, and PFAS are oftentimes excluded from a lot of regulation at the national and state level because of their difficulty being regulated, but at the county level, we can focus on it in a much more specific way. So I think it is a viable avenue for us to regulate. Thank you.
Any other comments for water use? Yes, Amy.
I'm wondering if we can, in section N2, separate out potable and non-potable water as two different categories. And then can we also just, wherever it says 0.2, include the unit right there, so 0.2 liter per kilowatt hour, just to clarify. I'm also wondering in N3, so we say any water well capable of withdrawing water at or above 70 gallons per minute. I don't know anything about wells, so please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I would guess maybe I could install a bunch of 60 gallon per minute wells and then kind of slide under the radar for this requirement. So I'm wondering if it's possible to add some kind of report total number of wells or total number of gallons per minute capacity on the property. I just feel like, maybe some company could install several 60 gallon per minute and then they don't have to report any of that. Let's see. So, and for B, I'm wondering if we could separate out an estimate of the total direct water usage and an estimate of the total indirect water usage. If we could require some estimate from them on that. I'm wondering if in, for D, a written explanation by an Illinois professional engineer on how the use of groundwater. I'm wondering if we could add a statement about mandatory testing schedule and include a standard, like reference a standard or give a standard here. So some kind of mandatory testing schedule. In E, I am concerned about if data centers move to a two-phase direct-to-chip cooling because while that will save a lot of water, it will bring a lot more potential pollutants into whatever they run off, if it's glycol water or whatever we think of as industrial waste materials, as well as freon-like things, which we don't want either. So I'm wondering if, in addition to being consistent with this NPDES, could we also require that they have maybe some kind of chemical and hazardous fluid disclosure report? And we could also research a little bit some of the specific things and some of the current lab testing for direct-to-chip cooling. And so we could identify exactly kind of including but not limited to these chemicals, right? So we could at least say what we're looking for in some of them, because they might not be, again, as Lincoln mentioned, they might not be covered in this National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. I'm also wondering if in the same section E, could we talk about a pretreatment plan for water that will be discharged whether or not it goes into municipal sewer or it's stored on site, if that's possible to require. Let's see. And also in F, it says the board may request copies of well records from the Illinois State Water Survey and may require an estimate from a qualified hydrogeologist. Could we just say shall, shall require an estimate? And just kind of make the whoever wants to build a data center pay for that. Again, in 5.2, it says the report shall include documentation that the water usage effectiveness is no more than 0.2. And again, could we just add the unit there, liter per kilowatt hour? And yes, so I understand why we talk a lot about closed loop cooling and other kinds of cooling, but I guess my primary concern is that they will move to other types of cooling, which they will just say, oh, we're not using any water, but they're actually going to be much more polluting long-term for us. Okay, so those are my comments. Thanks.
Okay, any other comments?
It's real quick. Lois Kane, I live in Urbana. That's Kain. The requires an annual report on water usage. Why is it an annual? Why can't it be quarterly? Why can't we just see more often what they're doing to our water? I don't know, annual is just a standard amount of time, but it seems like it gives them a whole year to use and abuse and screw around with our water until we find out what we've done with it. So, make them do it monthly or, quarterly, but something, it seems like a year is just too long.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments on water use and cooling? Okay, seeing none, we are now going to move on to the next section, and that is our final section before public comment, so y'all can run wild. Okay, so energy use and impact on the electrical grid. So this is section 6170. So first, requires that big data center buildings to comply with International Energy Conservation Code, with the International Energy Conservation Code. It also requires some combination of on-site and off-site renewable energy generation totaling 50%, or on-site energy storage at not less than 50% of peak demand for a minimum duration of 15 minutes for grid resilience. And then finally, requires the special use permit application to include an explanation of the impacts that the proposed big data center will have on our electrical grid. The report must be prepared by a third-party consultant. And I do just want to note that all charges for studies and whatnot, we've got that defined right in the beginning as something that's covered by the developer for all. Okay, John, did you have any notes that you wanted to add before we open it up?
No, that's my summary.
Great. Okay, you start with your name and then your comment.
Hi, Chris Powers. Section 6.1.70, paragraph 2, I guess, requires some combination of on-site and off-site renewable energy generation totaling 50% of capables, I'm going to read from the ordinance, of supplying not less than 50% of the big data center's peak electrical demand for a minimum duration of 15 minutes. There's several things wrong with this. This section says you can do this, you can rely on a combination of on-site and off-site renewable energy generation or on-site energy storage, which is not defined as renewable. Oil is an energy storage. Coal, whatever. So that needs to be clarified. At not less than 50% of peak demand of the data center for a minimum of 15 minutes. 15, I own the first solar array ever built in Rantoul. I built it with my hands. Let me tell you, 15 minutes of storage is diddly squat. It's nothing. These centers will run 24 hours a day. If there's an interruption in their power, it will last longer than 15 minutes because they won't just shut their plant down for 15 minutes. Otherwise, they're going to keep going. And then you're going to be into gas-fired generators. But 15 minutes of renewable energy storage, which should be specified. Battery storage, perhaps. That should be a minimum of 12 hours.
Thank you.
And as Forrest Gump said, that's all I got to say about that.
Any other comments for energy use and impact on the electrical grid?
All right, hello, my name is Aiden Rivera-Rogers. I am a resident of Urbana. I have a variety of questions, both on here on the energy use and impact, as well as on the wildlife impacts that were sort of grandfathered in from the wind farms and solar farms. First of all, I did have a question. Is there a reason we decided the 50% in terms of on-site energy storage, not less than 50% of peak demand? Is that just an arbitrary number, or how was that decided?
It was what was in the Aurora ordinance. So
Okay,
that's
so-
where we started. And if you think it should be higher, I'd like to hear that.
Okay, that was actually my question. Is I didn't know if there was a legal limit that we could set, but I would advocate for raising that as high as possible, because not only do I would argue data centers have a very negligible benefit to the community, but by increasing that amount, it could also help actually push us forward in developing renewable energy infrastructure. If we allow these data centers to be built, if they also mandate even up to 100% or over 100% of their total energy usage, even if they go out of business, if they're no longer used for that purpose, we'd still have that infrastructure left over. So it's an investment in the future, regardless of if these data centers continue operating. That could also come with a clause to keep, I recognize that within the also purchasing of energy, it doesn't have to be from within the county. If we want to focus more on local county or depending on regional development, we could say that that energy has to come from within the county if we want to, again, focus on that more regional development here. I would also advocate for striking the or clause from the energy storage. So instead of or, it would be and. So that way we both are developing potential renewable energy infrastructure that we can use in the future, as well as providing for any sort of resilience, which is to the benefit of the data centers as well, ultimately. Also, when it comes to the, I know I'm out of time, but when it comes to the environmental regulations and impact assessments that are grandfathered in from the wind farm and solar farm or special use permits, they really generally do not apply to the construction of hyperscale data centers. By and large, I would suggest drafting a separate specific set of requirements for those, especially considering that the actual footprint and damage done to the environment by hyperscale data centers is going to be much larger and much more permanent than the construction of any wind farm or solar farms. And once that is done, there's not really repairing it. So we should be fully informed and fully aware of what harm is going to be done by the construction of these facilities prior to that. And as the last thing, when we're looking for any sort of if we're saying, we need to see what we need to wait until proposals to see, what our limit should be, we can already look to other places that have had these hyperscale centers built. As you guys have said, you've already pulled from the Aurora ordinances to see what we can guess as to what the environmental impacts would be, the draws on power and water, et cetera, should be. There's no reason for us to go into this blind or wait for the private developers to sort of set the standard. They've already been built somewhere else. We can do the research. We can look around for that. There's no reason to wait.
Thank you.
Hello, Elise Duty Jones, Urbana residents. And pardon my not knowing the International Energy Conservation code, but I don't see any language that talks about energy recovery systems, ways that we insist that how they design this, any energy loss is recovered in some way, shape, or form. Rice University has promising technology where that heat from the data center can now, be, I don't want to say altered towards electricity, but at least steered towards becoming more electricity. Also, during the construction of such a large item, we never talk about how much energy is used as people drive from Indiana and Missouri for the construction jobs. I definitely want to see an insistence of local hire so that we are bringing that gas mileage quantity down from an environmental standpoint. And those dollars are being spent locally on our people, even if they have to be trained by this, whoever decides to build this item. So from just an environmental standpoint, those miles are excessive. And we see all of our large projects here in Champaign and Urbana drawing a lot of folks from out of state. And we really need to make sure that these construction jobs are local. And that is all.
Okay, sorry. Lot size,
Amy
I think,
Hatch.
applies here as well, partially because a big data center, as you define as 10,000 square feet or larger, is not simply a large building. And combine that within the draft current as it stands, there does not appear to be not only not a clear maximum lot size, but multiple big data centers could be covered under just one special use permit. And when they get this one special use permit, they're saying how much water, how much power they're going to use. It really, a multiple under one permit, that doesn't seem wise. It seems like they should each have to go under because the major electrical infrastructure is required. Substations, transformers, switching equipment, transmission facilities, backup generators. The draft appropriately requires analysis of potential effects on the grid and electricity prices. However, given the potential scale of these facilities and the size, 1,200, 1,500 acres, this issue deserves considerably more independent study. Again, not just comment from, valued experts, but real studies before the county establishes a permanent zoning framework. The county needs to determine who will bear the cost of required grid improvements, whether existing customers would be affected by the costs, whether the regional infrastructure can reliably support the additional demand, and what happens during grid stress or emergency. Who is prioritized to receive the power if the grid can't handle powering all of us at once? Economic development should not result in existing residents or businesses subsidizing infrastructure required primarily to serve a new and privately owned industry. Thanks.
Hello, I'm David Main, resident of Champaign. Well, look, I think one of besides water, the primary reason that many of us are interested in this is that there'd be no contribution of greenhouse gas production or consumption of large amount of electricity, increasing the community's electricity rates. Obviously, that's what everyone's concerned about. So with that in mind, as it has to do with your requirement that 25 to 50% of power be renewable, clean energy source, the obvious suggestion would make that 100%. I'm not knowledgeable enough to know how impractical and not possible that is. Although one could say if it's not possible, then fine, they can build all their centers in Texas if they wish. But at any rate, 25 to 50% sounds to me like unnecessarily low. We don't want any greenhouse gas production because of this entity coming to this county, number one. And number two, what county resident wants to pay more electricity rates? So if it's at all possible, increase that 50% number to 75 to 100 as far as the amount of power capability when it's at peak. So where would that power come from? Well, it would be, so the concept is bring your own power. Of course, in Texas, that means building gas-powered plants. So here it would be very clear, bring your own clean energy. And perhaps the way to get around the problem with the 100% as well, to what extent you can't produce your own clean power on site, you will purchase from the grid the equivalent clean energy from a community electricity source, such as an example, Nexamp that is here in Sydney, Illinois, and some of us purchase our power from them. Why could that not be possible? It doesn't have to be Nexamp. It could be whoever you want. So anyway, and I know you're all familiar with that, so off-site clean energy generation. And the last thought, make sure you define what the clean energy source would be. I see, I don't know if it's been eliminated or it's highlighted, the modular nuclear reactors. I know that's enormously arguable, whether that should be allowed or not allowed. One point there would be, of course, those modular reactors are not practically available now, so that's probably a moot point. I'll just leave it that it's arguable. I don't know the correct answer myself other than it is a source of radiation just as any traditional nuclear power plant is. So perhaps we should be reluctant about modular nuclear reactors. Anyway, increase the clean energy requirement, if you would, please. Thank you.
Hello again, George Hardebeck from north of town. And so when we think about the long-term journey, there's money and resources coming out of our community that are going to help these people make a lot of money over a shorter period of time and continue to make money after that. Whereas if we were to think in terms of the investment that we've made into taxes for universities, studies that went in behind all of this, even the energy that we're consuming, the energy that's been taken away from us, all of that, what if we were to think about these places as being, okay, you're going to make an initial investment. We're obviously going to make some kind of initial investment, but over time, this really should be for the well-being. And of course, there are externalized costs like social and ecological costs that we need to counter or figure into this that could allow us to think about this as, maybe being local cooperatives over time so that there's an ongoing investment and ownership of the local economy in all of this. And, maybe they make enough profit and move on, and enough, of course, comes down to some countries are now, like Spain, looking at companies that are a certain size, having caps, or not just caps, but where anybody that goes over a certain size, everybody starts to become an owner of that company. So, mutual economy. And there are a lot of explorations and all that in this world. And of course, we're not covering this and all this, but I don't know if we're going to. So if we're not going to cover it this time, maybe we need to cover it one of these other times in the future, because corporations move into areas and they very often move out again. And some places have forced them to leave their equipment so they can keep that going as a cooperative afterwards. So, how can we think of this as being mutually beneficial for all of us and, an improvement, again, during, a long building mass extinction of taking away too much and needing to restore more, also for all of our well-being and social taking that has happened through, many generations here, that we can be thinking about how do we subsidize that and do reparations in that instead of, towards those who already have way too much already. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brianna Davis of Champaign. So in the ordinance, it talks about having a report on whether or not it's going to like increase cost of energy, and also all of the regulations on the energy it uses. I want to know what happens if it does do that, like if we're going to have any regulations in place, if we do anticipate it's going to increase the cost, how we're not going to pass it on to the citizens of the county. And then also what consequences they have if they don't follow our regulations, like how are we going to enforce it, if it's going to be something like a fine. These data centers have almost infinite money, a lot of them, and what we're going to do to like make sure that they're following the regulations that we put in place. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Lincoln from Urbana. I had a quick question about the battery system. Is the intention of that battery system to be used just during grid stress such as blackouts or brownouts? Or, sorry, is it just blackouts or would it be brownouts at any grid stress as well to lower costs? Sure. Okay. My suggestion is that at least some amount of that battery storage should be devoted to brownouts and grid stress, because as you may know, the cost that the elevated energy costs are most caused during grid stress when energy is most expensive. So in terms of actually reducing costs for other residents, using that battery storage during those times would be the most helpful. In addition to the blackouts, so they have insurance. Additionally, I think there needs to be some kind of plan in place for all these data centers to then recharge the batteries once they're used, because if they do it cheaply, they may just try and keep operating at their full power demand and not recharging the batteries. And then when we get back to that grid stress, they won't have any storage to use and they'll be causing us expense and potentially going out and having to use the backup generators. So like more of a concrete plan put forward by the data centers and an obligation they follow it for using that battery storage in a way that actually helps the community.
Jen, did you have a comment?
I did, and it was actually about the grid as well. I did a little bit of research, as I'm known to do. But one thing I was actually wondering, similarly to what someone actually just said, would there be a way for us to put in the ordinance that they would have to put back into the grid, especially for blackouts or brownouts? That's one. But the second one is that when there is a large outage like that in a city, a municipality, something like that, where these data centers are, I have read about some of them, specifically one in Northern Virginia, where the backup generators got turned on immediately, and that pulled power all the way to Chicago. Like, it affected the grid in Chicago and there. So I was wondering if there is a way to implement like a delay or something like that when they turn on their backup generators or something like that, especially if it is a very large use of energy that they need. So just some additions.
Any other? Yes, Amy.
This is where my ultra paranoia will be exposed in a public forum. I'm really sorry. Let's see. So section O here, 1A, all data center buildings shall comply with the most recent or previous International Energy Conservation Code. Could we attach one that we choose as an appendix as one? I'm just assuming they'll pick one from 1953 or something like that. And, I'm just wondering. I'm just trying to. I'm sorry. I'm hyper paranoid. Then with 2A, we mentioned this nameplate capacity, and my concern is that I think, if I understand correctly, nameplate capacity is what it can do in an ideal situation, like if it's in the Sahara Desert and there's sun, basically all the time. But if it's not running in the Sahara Desert, it might only get us 20 to 25% of the nameplate capacity, which means that it's not really going to be supplying a facility with enough power to run at its peak electrical demand. And I also wonder about the phrase peak electrical demand. I mean, their aim is to run 24/7 consistently. So I guess I'm not sure what we intend by that phrase, peak electrical demand. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to change somehow to be not nameplate capacity, but actually somehow define or require that it actually delivers power to the facility. Because what could happen, and this is my paranoia, sorry, they set up this solar bank and they say, yes, it's capable of supplying, and if we take the suggestions of several of the speakers here tonight, it's capable of doing 80% or 100%. Capable of doesn't mean it's actually powering the facility, right? So they could have something, sell that power back to the grid when it suits them, and still run something else when it suits them. And that's a concern of mine. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we could change the language a bit to make it not possible for them to resell power when it suits them. That's a timing issue, right? So they might be using power at the same time that we all are in the evenings, right? And that kind of makes it more expensive for us. I'm also with this battery storage, so it says supplying not less than 50% of the big data center's peak electrical demand for a minimum duration of 15 minutes. And again, I think that, well, a theoretical physicist I know told me battery storage has gotten exponentially better. It's still crazy expensive, but the amount of power it can deliver quickly has grown a lot. So I'm just wondering if we can put some more technical specs in this section as well to guarantee that it's not just the measurements that they report to us as what they expect their peak load to be, but also if we require battery storage of a certain capacity and a certain speed, then we know we're covered, right? That's kind of just like a belt and suspenders approach to it. Okay, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Okay, we are now to the portion of our meeting where you have a total of 5 minutes to address anything listed on the agenda for today. So we're restricting it obviously to data centers. So again, if you would seek to, actually we got to start with public input slips, I'm sorry. So I will, if you have a slip, you can bring it to the front. I still have a good chunk here that I'm going to work my way through. Okay, so up first we have Mika Raviv.
Good evening. My name is Mika. I'm a resident of the city of Champaign. I have a few concerns about specifically the grid, but we just talked about that. I'm going to second a lot of the things that some people just previously mentioned. I believe that the current draft requires a report asking whether the local grid can accommodate a data center, whether transmission could be overstrained, whether generation capacity is sufficient, whether existing customers could bear additional costs, and so on. And while those questions are important, I'm concerned about what happens once those facilities do put pressure on the grid, when ratepayers do bear the costs, and if the facility's demand contributes to the capacity constraint. While it is really important that we have regulations for reporting how the data centers do affect the grid and how they affect the community, it's not regulation. And while there are federal and statewide legislation that might establish meaningful environmental regulations for data centers, as mentioned earlier, I don't believe that our county can rely on those existing legislation as precedent. The current EPA administration has made it clear they won't regulate or make recommendations for the data center industry. In fact, they're pulling back existing regulations that have acted as a foundation for air and water quality, as well as wildlife protection. So my biggest concern is that we should include this in terms of like actual tangible regulation, rather than just requiring a report. So ordinary residents should not subsidize enormous industrial electricity loads. The county should require that the applicant bears the incremental costs caused by the demand rather than the residents. The residential customers also should not lose power that a data center can continue operating. And if possible, it should reflect that in the ordinance. Don't leave that as a question in the report. During a grid emergency, large data centers should be required to curtail their loads before ordinary residential customers are subjected to avoidable interruptions to the extent that is legally possible. And if a data center is going to consume an extraordinary amount of electricity, then it should be required to bring more resources to the table. And again, I just really believe that there should be consequences for failing to meet the existing requirements that are already drafted in the ordinance, but also that we need to take it a bit further in terms of actual regulations and what happens in terms of enforcement. There's some places where the ordinance says the county may request something like a report or more information, also where the operator should take reasonable steps, but there's no fine for exceeding the approved electrical load. So what would happen if the facility exceeded the water limit, or if it operates equipment that wasn't approved, or if it repeatedly violates a condition of the special use permit? If it submits inaccurate information, or if the violation continues for months on end. I believe the ordinance should answer those questions before the data center is built, not after, and we should not be relying on statewide or federal regulations to make that happen. I would also strongly encourage the task force to create a dedicated enforcement section in this ordinance, which would include those fines, daily penalties for continuing violations, mandatory corrective action, county inspection authority, independent audits, and the ability to suspend or revoke a special use permit for serious repeated violations as legally possible. If the penalty is cheaper than complying with the law, then it isn't really regulation, it's more like a fee. Once those facilities are built, the county is going to have a lot less leverage. So please don't write the ordinance based on what you hope responsible companies will do, but write it based on what we need the law to require so that we have healthy communities, healthy environment, and consequences for when those companies might violate. Yeah, thank you.
D. Hugo.
Hi, George
D.
Hardebeck,
No,
just north of town.
We've got slips that we're doing.
Oh, I gave you slip.
Yep. So I'm at D. Somebody else is.
Oh, you're going to call somebody up? Oh,
That's
good.
right. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. D.
D. Hugo from Champaign. I am just a consumer, that's it. I'm no authority on anything, but I have a lot of questions. First of all, I think if you would say, well, what's your number one issue? It's the water. The Mahomet Aquifer is wonderful. It gives us great water. The water survey, I believe, said they're not even exactly sure how the water is replenished into the aquifer. They got a lot of ideas, but it's not a clear idea of how it's done. Does anyone remember about 5 years ago when we were kind of in a drought situation and people in Mahomet who had wells had to get the well digger back out because they weren't getting any water out of their wells and they had to drill down deeper to get that? Okay, that's one example. How about the fact that part of the spring and the fall and winter we were under a drought? And the weatherman said we had like 17 inches that we were short on rain. And again, if rain is one of the things that supplies our aquifer, my point with this is that the weather has gone crazy. Some parts of the country can't get rain, and other people can't turn it off. I think we're in for more and more of this. It's just a guess. But wonder if we get in a drought situation. And wonder if we've got this data center that's just not officially reporting like they should, the amount of water that they're using. And pretty soon, there's no water for us, the people who live in this community. It'll turn into a ghost town. And I just think the water is the most important thing to protect. And if they can't live up to what we need in the way of protection of the Muhammad Aquifer, then they need to go look elsewhere. I have one more thing about sound. One of the previous meetings I came to was a person was a farmer, and they talked about the animals on their farm. And again, yes, citizens or humans hear a certain range of sound, but animals hear a lot better than us. Cats, dogs, wild animals in the area, cattle that are being raised. I'd like to know how those were affected with the sound problem that we are anticipating. I think the sound is going to go pretty far. And one more thing that's just kind of my opinion is, why don't we go to the person or the data center that complains the most, that said it was a mistake, we did this wrong, we did that wrong, we're in a mess? Get them to talk to us. And then what about the one place that said, oh, our data center, we are doing so great. We're so happy with these people, and we're just so glad. I don't hear any of those on television. Of course, everything on television is negative, but I think we need to learn from those who have had a horrible time and a place that actually did have a successful data center relationship go up. I think we need to work with that. And also I'm hoping that our University of Illinois and people educated in the things that we're questioning would be more accessible to us and make the reports that we want to hear and tell us about the things that we're wondering about. And we've got a whole university here with some pretty smart people there that I would hope that they would be considering giving us their education and time. Thank you very much.
Bruce Beam. Again, the name is Bruce.
Hello, my name is Bruce. I study ecology at the University of Illinois. I just want to bring up a couple things about wildlife impacts, especially with noise. So I want to echo what was just said, that the humans and animals have different auditory receptors. So the language that's used right now, and I know you guys haven't consulted your noise person yet, I just want to make sure this point gets hammered home. So currently the language is 45 dBA, which is an A weighting of the decibels. A weighting is basically a frequency filter that's designed for human ears. So dBA is a good measurement of stuff like traffic noise or jet engines or speakers, not really when we're talking about wildlife, especially birds and pollinators. So yeah, the dBA is an effective measurement for some things. For the data centers, especially with low frequencies, most of the noise pollution is under 200 hertz. So a lot of the volume from data centers can actually hide in the dBA measurements. So we need some more comprehensive frequency analysis. Another thing is the 24-hour constant noise. So the current language has the day, evening, night, the LDEN, which accounts for 10 extra decibels at night and 5 extra decibels during the evening. This is like pretending to solve it. But especially when we're talking about wildlife, most of the wildlife is active foraging and mating during the evening. So the effects on them needs to be properly addressed. Also, the effects on us during our sleep needs to be properly addressed. Yeah, so the 24-hour the nonstop of it all. Most of the research done on noise pollution with wildlife is primarily songbirds during the day, so there's lots of gaps. We just need to make sure we look into that comprehensively. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Amanda Pankow. Then after Amanda, we have Liz Jackson.
Yeah, my name is Amanda Pankaw. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm the Director of Energy and Community Resiliency at Prairie Rivers Network, and I have a master's degree in wildlife ecology. Our offices are based in Champaign County, but we have staff statewide, and I'm here to offer several recommendations from Prairie Rivers Network specifically on improving and strengthening the wildlife protections in the ordinance. So the changes I'm offering tonight are not meant to be final recommendations, but a starting point for the task force to consider. I'd like to continue to be available to help workshop the language and would encourage the task force to reach out to other wildlife and natural lands experts in the area. So first of all, I wanted to discuss changes to the existing language in sections I and K. So section I of the draft ordinance describes the Illinois Department of Natural Resources consultation process for endangered species. The language in the draft ordinance is outdated, and we have proposed some changes to better reflect how that IDNR consultation process is actually carried out today. And I've spoke with some IDNR staff about that. We're also suggesting the addition of language that would allow the county to require the big data center to follow the suggestions that the DNR makes in that consultation process. So by law, y'all are required to consult with them and they're gonna tell you things, but you're not then required to do what they tell you or to have the applicant do that. So we would suggest adding language that says that you will require the applicant to do those things. So these might be things like avoiding certain seasonal tree cutting if there's T&E bat species, or setting back a certain distance from protected areas or known threatened and endangered species locations. So moving on to section K, this outlines conditions for acceptable wildlife impacts. This language states that the big data center shall be located, designed, constructed, and operated so as to avoid and, if necessary, mitigate the impacts to wildlife to a sustainable level of mortality. First, and just a real quick change, is we suggest adding threatened and endangered plants to that in addition to wildlife. But more importantly, this language is pretty broad and vague, and it begs what information will be used to make this determination and what a sustainable level of mortality is. So in a second here, I'm going to talk about a suggestion to add a habitat protection and enhancement plan as a requirement in order to have the information to actually meet what's in section K here. So those are my comments on the existing language in section K and I, and then I'm going to now talk about some additions that we could add, starting with the Habitat Protection and Enhancement Plan that would pull together all the relevant plant, wildlife, T&E species, protected areas, agency consultation information into one place. And so the applicant would be required to do this and tell you how they work to avoid, minimize, and mitigate any negative impacts. And as part of this plan, the county should consider what mitigation options may be required of the applicant. So this could look like habitat enhancement or restoration at other sites in the county, or possibly paying funds to local, private, and public conservation organizations. And this plan would again support the determinations that are already outlined in section K of the draft ordinance. Additionally, we suggest the county should require federal consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In the absence of other laws or permits that might trigger this federal review, we think that it's important the county actually require it. We're suggesting that ordinance include a definition of what protected areas are, things like wetlands, riparian areas, lands owned by forest preserves, state lands, et cetera. And I have a handout that I think maybe Andrew sent around to y'all beforehand. So we would also suggest a minimum setback distance of 1,500 feet for protected areas, but have flexibility to increase that minimum distance if needed. And your consultation with DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, the information in that habitat Protection Enhancement Plan would provide you the data you needed to determine if a bigger setback was needed. We suggest the ordinance require dark sky lighting, which you've heard from some other speakers tonight, things like shielded light fixtures, downward directed lighting, warmer colored temperatures. We're also starting to discuss new proposals on noise to address low frequency noise, pure tones, and changes over ambient noise, and encourage the task force noise expert to also consider wildlife, as you've again heard from other speakers. The draft ordinance talks about water use, but we suggest that the county also requires studies to look at how water withdrawals and discharges impact aquatic species, wetlands, floodplains, hydrology. And finally, well, the ordinance should consider how their structures are designed to avoid impacts to birds, like collisions with wires, substations, things like that. And then something else that I heard come up tonight was your screening could incorporate native plant species, could be looked as a way to enhance wildlife value and habitat connectivity. And then I think that we've heard tonight some more language maybe is needed on decommissioning, and that should also consider wildlife protected areas, things like that. Thank you.
Liz Jackson is next, and then after Liz, we have Stuart Levy.
To do something here. Okay. You've had, yeah, thank you. You've heard great input from everyone in this audience tonight, and I support them. I'm here because I'm concerned about your stance on decommissioning. I don't think it should be on the applicant or the successors to decommission the data centers. The solar farms and the wind farms all state that they will take care of decommissioning. So that's my comment.
So we have Stuart, and then after that, we have George Hardeck.
Okay. Hey again, Stuart Levy in Champaign. Let's see, a couple things. I did want to talk about decommissioning, and so I see in the standard ordinance language, there's the notion of a non-adaptable structure that's used for solar and wind farms, figuring nobody's going to want them after they're done. And I want to urge you to designate big data centers also as non-adaptable. Even if you could imagine that somebody might want to move into one, there could be enormous costs in doing that. And the case where you might need to exercise that that option would be the one where the market falls out, where the bubble that we're probably in bursts, and lots of the operators go out of business and they walk away, or they go bankrupt, they vanish, and you're stuck with not just big warehouse-like buildings, but all kinds of equipment, much of which will be toxic, electronics, coolant fluids, all kinds of things that would not be easily disposed of. And so please make sure that, so the point of designating these as non-adaptable structures is that it would engage your holding money aside sufficient to do whatever you decide is appropriate for site remediation. I mean, I probably agree there's no hope in turning it back into useful farmland, but at least you should not treat them, you don't treat data centers like warehouses. Warehouses you could find a market for, data centers need expensive remediation work, and you need to have somebody make a serious estimate as to what it's going to take to do that remediation, even to turn it back into a warehouse. So let's see. The other thing was about drainage. So I see a lot of language about drainage that looks like the kind of thing that makes sense for wind and solar farms where you expect there's going to be construction and existing drainage tile is going to be squished and needs to be maintained. But I don't know, I mean, maybe some of you here will know whether it makes sense to expect that drainage tile is still going to be useful if it's got thousands of tons per acre of concrete running over it. I would worry that it would not be functional even if you try to tell the applicant that they're supposed to do that. So I don't know, maybe tile is more resilient than I know, or maybe there's some way of doing it so that you can expect that rainwater that falls on one side of a huge data center is going to be able to flow under it and across to the other side. But I would worry about that. I would especially worry about it if I were a neighbor of it. So for wind and solar farms, you get pretty much still permeable surface if they were built on farm type land. Not so for a data center. You get, maybe hundreds or even thousands of acres of new impermeable land, and when rain falls on it, where's it going to go? It will go to the neighbors, and what are they going to do about it? I don't understand whether there's provision in this for dealing with what's going to happen to the water that falls on newly made impermeable land. Thank you.
George.
George Hardebeck again. Yeah, there's so many little things that are part of this that so 40 to 60% of the prairie locally was ephemeral wetland in the springtime. So all those pipes that come out, or if they get damaged, the use of those drainage tiles, then yeah, there's going to be some ephemeral wetland, and it should be there. It actually should be there. That should be part of what gets replaced in sort of remediation of all of any kind of ecological expense that's going out of this. If we make this a cooperative in some aspect and continue to grow in that direction, which I know may seem really outrageous to some of you, then, we could be seeing, this being community-based, and so place-based, community-based, ecology-based, where we have the university ongoing in relationship with the best practices of the technology of the time to keep moving into better technology so that there is more recyclable and better remediation for the chemicals that are involved, all as part of an ongoing relationship in practice. We could hold those standards, and the reason for holding standards and the reason for holding boundaries is not, because we can just completely trust anybody with big money to and power to be of goodwill. And we have data now for that because there are studies on greed as an addiction, which shows that once people are in a position of having money, power, privilege over all that, imperially and rigged systems, they end up having symptoms that are immediately reoccurring, consistent, where they grow more insatiably greedy, they grow more aggressive, louder, lying and stealing, and empathy loss, which has a lot of terms in our culture, but is also called imperial disconnect and Huber syndrome by some more deeper studies. And culturally, loss of internal compass, conscience, connection to heart, ear to heart, soul, loss. So, these are things we've talked about in a lot of different ways for a long time, but when we enable people to have power over, which the indigenous understood when we first, started having fur traders marry into their mutual economies and mutual societies and ecology, or relatedness and ecology mutual, keeping it mutual for holistic well-being and long integral harmonized balances. They were trying to teach us that, and part of this, one of the stories in that is the Wendigo, when these people who go so hungry they become giant monsters that consume everything, including themselves, skeletal monsters. So they knew this stuff. That's why we declared equality as an intrinsic quality and right of humanity, but we didn't constitute it. So now we have movements on the planet like the Community Rights of Nature, the Global or the Wellbeing Economy Alliance to change all of that. The cooperatives that are under that umbrella as well, or at least seen under that umbrella, as the black co-ops that are resurging following Mondragon in Spain. We have all of this going on because we are in a crisis globally of finding out what happens when we let this stuff go for a really long time, because we've been sold into it when imperialism from bulliedom has become monetarily and militarily stratified, and then the media too becoming imperially structured, so those on top don't want to turn that around. They want to keep it imperial, so they also want to sell their lies and propaganda and so on. And I worked in fields that did, work in public relations and all that kind of stuff, in politics as well. And, and I can tell you that, it's about the game. It's about winning. It's not about the cost of people's lives and of the life of the planet and each other and the life of the region. So, so it's really, we have the science now to understand all of this. We have the movements, and we have to share it, and we have to, use it, because if we don't, we lose it kind of all too easily at this time. Thanks.
Next, we have Lois Kane, and after Lois, we have Kath Brinkman.
I've got another comment about the noise level. This morning, I read an article from WPLN 90.3. It's Nashville's local news and NPR station. And the issue was the emergent pollutant of concern, noise that never turns off. Sounds and vibrations from data centers are penetrating in surrounding towns and nature. The article talked with a homeowner who lives in Mississippi, just over the state line from Memphis and Musk's massive data center, who can no longer stand to be in his own home, on his own property, because of constant noise and the feeling he gets. Nothing blocks the noise or relieves the pressure he feels all the time. So I kind of went on and read some more about noise. Noise is increasingly defined as unwanted and or harmful sound. For decades, the standard metric has been the A-weighted decibel dBA level, but it does not tell the full story. The decibel level, the metric, only captures a specific range of frequencies, missing low and very high frequencies of sound, and it's just not sufficient to measure data center noise. The low-frequency noises of constant humming of all the electronics, travels long distances, penetrates homes, is inescapable and difficult to mitigate, and barriers don't help. These frequencies are processed through other parts of the body, not through the auditory system. Researchers are finding that communities are suffering, wildlife is disappearing, pets and agricultural animals are impacted from the constant noise. Noise pollution affects the body and the brain. Noise pollution leads to increased blood pressure and heart rate, premature death, cardiovascular, metabolic, and neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, mental health decline, and reduced learning abilities in kids. One of the researchers in the article has been studying noise for decades and believes we are just beginning to fully understand noise pollution and the overall burden of the disease in the public. He also believes need for more research is urgent, but we just don't have the time as industry is building out so rapidly, so we just have to use the research we already have. In your standard conditions for allowable noise, you have noise monitoring shall occur continuously during both daytime and nighttime in whatever season is considered to be the most problematic for generation and control of noise. I don't think there's one season. I think it's continual every season, and I don't know why you would just pick like one season to monitor the noise for 24 hours. It should, I think it should happen all year round in every season, so thanks.
Kath Brinkman, and then after Kath, we have Karen Kane. Green.
Okay, I got it. Thanks. So I have a few concerns. Some of these will be echoing what other people had said. The provisions regarding the backup power generators, I think, leave significant questions about potential pollution and emissions. Noise limits are also a serious issue. How will compliance be monitored and enforced? If fines are minimal relative to the company's resources, what prevents ongoing violations from simply becoming a cost of doing business? I'm also concerned about the direct and indirect water usage associated with the mega data center? How will the county obtain an accurate assessment of total water consumption? What mechanisms ensure that reported usage reflects actual usage? And again, how will compliance be enforced? Perhaps, and I think other areas have used this, maybe they be restricted to using gray water only. Anyway, I hope that, I appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing. I understand that this takes a lot of your time and you're putting great consideration into this, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Karen Kane, and then after Karen, we have Sarah McAvoy.
Hi, Karen Kane from Champaign. Bruce already spoke to my concerns about lighting, so thank you for that. And my other concern is about decommissioning, which has been addressed a little bit. Once a hyperscale data center ceases to be viable, a decommissioning plan is vital. We must include it in our ordinance with some of the following issues being addressed. The owners, operators must be responsible for all decommissioning expenses. What is the timeline for decommissioning after the facility closes? 6 months? 12 months? All hazardous material must be removed. The county could require decommissioning funds equal to the net decommissioning costs plus 10%. This would be posted and maintained by a bonding company. The funds must be delivered to the county before construction begins. In an August 6, 2026 article by Ashwin Murthy at Columbia Law School in New York City, he addresses the issue of decommissioning. He ends the article with this: "The risk of abandoned data centers poses a pressing economic and environmental threat that current laws are only starting to address. States and localities have several viable tools at their disposal, including financial assurances, mandatory decommissioning plans, public appropriation rights, and e-waste regulations. Taken together, proactive regulation now can help ensure that people and communities are protected before the bubble potentially bursts." And I also wanted to say thank you so much for all the work you're doing. Thank you.
Sarah McAvoy, and after Sarah, we have Nancy Dietrich.
Hi, I'm Sarah McAvoy. I live in District 9 in Urbana. Thank you for your earnest collective effort to refine and revise the draft of legislation in a fair, right, and reasonable way to contain and restrict the development of AI hyperscale data centers in Champaign County. It was a very clever idea to solicit from the public feedback on specific sections of the 33-page draft so as to not overwhelm us with the assignment of giving feedback on every section. Thank you. To the scientists, environmentalists, ecologists, and other qualified specialists that gave feedback, I'm not qualified to provide that. And indeed, for me, it would have taken the use of AI to do it, and I'm not going to do it. So let me speak from my heart. I do not see the march toward AI and hyperscale data centers as inevitable. 70% of the American public across the political spectrum oppose data centers. This is not my dream for our already overwired kids, for our mental and physical health, for our future, for our scorched, finite, and vulnerable planet, for our collective well-being. We know the aims of tech corporations: profit, power, control, dominance. I do not trust corporations, and I need to know that the limits in the legislation you are proposing are enforceable. I'm asking you ultimately to refuse to subsidize the wealthiest corporations in the world toward a dubious and possibly dangerous future. This is this month's bill from Ameren for my household of 2 for $702.51. That is the highest Ameren bill we've ever had. I just started receiving this month my teacher retirement system pension. If I had to live on that alone, half of my income would be spent on the Ameren bill alone. This is robbery and would only increase with the development of an AI hyperscale data center. Thank you for listening and choosing the path for the highest good of people, land, wildlife, water, animals, and our kids.
We have Nancy Dietrich, and then after Nancy, we have Amy Hatch.
Hi, my name is Nancy Dietrich, and I also live in District 9 in Urbana. And I am once again here to voice my opposition to any hyperscale AI data center construction in Champaign County. As Mika, Brianna, and others also discussed before me, I want to express my concern about the vagueness in the ordinance about what would potentially happen to a data center if it violates any of the provisions in the ordinance, as well as the practical ability to enforce potential violations once it is built. When I read through the ordinance to see what was said about consequences of a data center violating any provisions in the ordinance, it seemed to amount to asking data centers politely to correct the violation. Along those lines, there seems to be a lot of text in the ordinance about monitoring and reporting of water and energy usage, for example, as well as noise monitoring. So my question is, when they report that, yes, we're using a lot of water, yes, we're using a lot of energy, so what? What happens next? I'm concerned that once the hyperscale data center is up and running, and I've mentioned this before, but the reality is there's probably not a whole lot that can be done about it. I did want to say another thing. You mentioned the city of Aurora and the setbacks of about 1,000 feet was in their ordinance. I watched a report that was that aired a few weeks ago on WAND TV that interviewed residents who lived near the data center in Aurora. And they said they could feel the vibrations from the generators while lying in bed. So stricter language at the least needs to be added to the ordinance that spells out penalties if a data center violates the law. Also, as Stuart mentioned earlier, adding language like no data center shall be approved unless the applicant demonstrates that they won't use X amount of energy, X amount of water, they won't exceed certain noise levels, et cetera. And if language like that isn't possible, then we need to do whatever it takes to keep these data centers out of our community, because I'm afraid if it gets built, it's going to become an ongoing fight on these issues, and we are the citizens will be suffering the consequences. Thank you.
Amy Hatch is up, and after Amy, we have Linda Frenfrock.
I hit this to start. Okay. I gotcha. Well, I guess with 5 minutes, I have enough time to start with. I really appreciate your time for this meeting, and also the task force work and everything you're doing. Don't think that's not appreciative. Again, my name is Amy Hatch. But as a resident and homeowner in our county, a farmland owner, I am very concerned. So I am here tonight to add my voice to many of us who are asking the county board and this task force to delay approval of the July 29th data center draft amendment. I really appreciate the amount of work that has gone into it so far. The draft addresses many legitimate concerns, but we're talking about hyperscale AI data centers. Those are humongous. I think we need to slow down and make sure we get this right. They're enormous permanent industrial facilities that once built can be extremely difficult and likely impossible to undo their full impacts. Several areas need more study and stronger protections. People already talked about water. You can't really say enough about that, but before construction begins, we need to have the proper studies and make sure we're not losing this. We talked about electrical, so I'll skip that over too, and noise. Farmland is another thing I don't think we can say enough about, mainly because it's one thing to use our best prime farmland. So that's some of the best farmland in the world, not just in this state or this area. And there doesn't appear to be the maximum lot size, which is really concerning because within the current draft ordinance, multiple data centers can be covered by just one special permit use. Without a maximum size, we can end up with 1,500 acres or more. That doesn't seem wise or designed to protect the county's best interest. And that is how we get the giant ones. And how can they have to report water and power on their initial permit. Why can't they tell us how big it's going to be in the long run and have a cap on it? We need firm limits on campus size, building footprint, height, impervious surfaces. Each data center should have its own approval, and there should be financial guarantees for eventual decommissioning and restoration, maybe even escrowing the money. Because if they go out of business, where are we going to get the money, even if they promise to decommission it, especially when people are talking about market corrections and this could be a bubble industry? Where's the money going to come from after it's built to decommission it? I'm not sure if anyone's mentioned, but another thing I would add is roads and traffic. Construction means years of heavy equipment, oversized loads, road closures, increased traffic, rural roads, bridges, farm traffic, emergency routes, school buses, all this could be affected. We need an independent study transportation that guarantees taxpayers aren't left paying for damage or upgrades caused by these projects. Fire service, fire protection. Do we have adequate, outside of the city limits, we have these volunteer rural fire protection districts. Is that adequate to cover a 1,500 or even just a 500 acre site? Where else are we at? Fines. I think we talked about deterrence, but the fines, the consequences, they need to be big enough to be real deterrents, not, we're talking about billionaire, some $1 trillion companies in some instances. So, fining them $1,000 or even $10,000, that's pocket change. Decommissioning, deconstruction, renewal of the site, restoring it, those are all extremely expensive. I'm not sure why we don't require them to prove they have the funds. The bubble industry is just concerning. But anyway, my concern isn't that the draft has too few requirements. It has many. My concern is that some of the biggest questions about the scale and the cumulative impacts are unresolved. Before we approve these projects, our county needs to conduct independent studies on the noise, the groundwater, farmland, transportation, electrical capacity and cost, emergency response capabilities, property values, as well as the decommissioning and the cumulative impacts. And yes, even if that means extending the moratorium for another year or longer. We have an opportunity to do it right and establish objective rules before they are built, rather than trying to fix problems afterwards. I know we're concerned about lawsuits and things like that, but we also face lawsuits, surrounding counties maybe will get upset if we destroy their water. I'm not sure how we can be sued by trying to set reasonable rules by which to protect our county and all of those things that I just mentioned. I don't know, the Power Act could serve as a guide for our ordinance. At a minimum, we should be at least that strict and even stricter for our county for the things they ask for us. A referendum, if we can't get one on the November 3rd ballot, put one on the next spring ballot that asks every voter in the county. You want voter turnout? Ask every voter in the county if they want a hyperscale AI data center built here. Let's take the time to get this right. I respectfully ask the county board to delay the July 29th amendment, conduct all the necessary independent studies, and strengthen the protections for residents, landowners, farmland, water resources, and taxpayers. I know this costs money, those studies, but maybe that's more reason that I think that's a good reason that stands up in court to a lawsuit. We needed to take the time to do our due diligence to protect our community. Thank you very much for your time.
Linda Finfrock, and then after Linda, we have Elizabeth Kirby.
Hi, my name's Linda Finfrock, and I'm in District 7 in Champaign. Except for 30 years that I spent teaching in San Diego, my family and I, for generations, have considered Champaign County our home. I've been attending your meetings and these meetings and several others for the last few months since I realized that hyperscale A1 data centers could be coming to Champaign. I have many concerns. I literally fear what could become of this area if time, tough decisions, more research and controls are not established before agreeing to any contracts. I'm curious how many months have gone into this draft. How many visits to existing big data centers has this committee visited? How many experts in the appropriate fields have been interviewed? What's the rush to have a final draft completed by mid-September? Really, what's the rush? What are the benefits of rushing into permitting these big data centers? What's going to happen between mid-September and April 24th of 27? You've been asked to make monumental decisions. This is not the time to rush into any decisions about hyperscale data centers. Counties across the country and maybe across the world are facing these similar challenges. Counties across the country and maybe across, sorry, there's not going to be any chance for us to go, whoops, we've made a mistake. Let's take our time, use caution, and avoid needless mistakes. One of my requests would be to allow more time for the Power Act to move forward. I think we should work as an Illinois team to use best practices in any and all hyperscale data centers going forward statewide. Personally, I'm thrilled Governor Pritzker has at least has asked the legislature to end tax breaks to these data centers. Why would these wealthy developers be given a tax break? Let them look elsewhere if they don't like what we're offering them. Have we ever faced decisions so big the face of our country, state, and our county could change? We have one chance to get this right. My top concerns for allowing hyperscale data centers in our county are the amount of water they gobble up, the massive amounts of electricity required to run them 24/7, 7 days a week, the constant noise generated that will impact all forms of life, the destruction of our farmland, which is some of the best in the world and can never be replaced, and lastly, the nighttime light pollution, which affects birds, migrations, as well as all forms of life. Champaign County relies on our treasured Mahomet Aquifer, along with 14 other counties. Do we even truly know its current capacity? I wonder how many other counties like Sangamon already or soon will allow access to these huge data centers, access. If I read the task force draft correctly, once we permit one data center, one hypercenter, we open the doors to all. Why would we do that? At what point will our aquifer run dry? These are my current top 5 concerns, and I have many, many others. Can we tap the brakes and really study the pros and cons of existing proposed A1 data centers? I'm old. I have fond memories of hedgerows, large wooded areas sprinkled throughout the county, spring walks through the fields with my grandfather searching for arrowheads and artifacts. I won't live to see the possible devastation that may accompany this if we make hasty decisions. Sadly, I feel like many of you are pro-hyperscale data centers, and we, your public, have a right to fight to not rush into decisions that may destroy why we love living here. I hope I'm wrong. I have spared you facts regarding all the possible negative consequences if we aren't careful. I do wonder if any of you have signed NDAs. I wonder if foreign entities who own some of our farmland would happily sell their land to data centers. And I feel like we were a team together fighting for the highest good going into perpetuity. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Elizabeth Kirby, and then Diane Marlin. No, Elizabeth? Okay. And Diane? I think I saw Diane leave. Okay. Brianna Davis. And then after Brianna, we have Chris Powers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna Davis. I want to make it clear that my end goal is absolutely to not have any hyperscale AI data centers. I understand that this process is very important. I hope that the Power Act passes, but if it doesn't, I understand that we need to have like very strict protections for our county to make sure that people are safe. One of the things I wanted to bring up are kind of looking to Pennsylvania and what they've done with the GRID Act that recently was passed. The grid requirements, I suppose, they require that you pay the full cost of new electricity generation, transmission, distribution, and other infrastructure needed to power any AI data centers. They also talk about entering into meaningful community benefit agreements. So far, we keep talking about like regulating them and making sure that they don't cause as much harm as possible, but we haven't been talking about any potential benefits that we could have for our community. And I think that's important. It's very clear that most of the community does not want them at all. And if we are going to be forced to have them, we should have some sort of benefit to them. A big concern with a lot of people, obviously, is energy cost. And if they're going to use energy, they should be paying for it themselves. It shouldn't be a burden to us. So I think that should be something that we consider, is that if everyone is so against it, but we can't do anything legally to ban them, we should be looking to work what we can to make sure that they benefit us and that they're not just something that harms our community and upsets members of our community without any sort of benefit that we gain from them. Thank you.
Chris Powers. And after Chris, we have Lincoln Deere.
I want to associate myself with basically all the comments made tonight. This is a wonderful room full of intelligent people, thoughtful people, and that includes you, and I appreciate all the work you've put in and the work you're going to put in still to come. I think my primary objection to this ordinance is that throughout it requires a number of reports in advance and during operations. Tell us how much water you use. Tell us how much electricity you use. Explain how it affects this and that. But it doesn't set any metrics for what's acceptable. I mean, it does set some. But every one of those questions that you want answered in a report, you should answer in advance and say, in that ordinance, here's what level is acceptable. Otherwise, you're asking them to write the ordinance, more or less, at least half of it. I want to talk about what this is all for in the first place, AI. I hate AI. I hate the thought of it. I hate what it's already doing to our society worldwide, what it's doing to our students, what it even does to me when I say, Alexa, what time is it? Like, I could probably figure that out, but see, I'm kind of leaning there on technology to do something that I already know how to do. 80 years ago this year, the legendary science fiction writer Isaac Asimov wrote a short story. And in that short story, he presented the 3 laws of robotics. The first law: a robot can never harm a human being or, through an action, allow a human being to come to harm. The second law: a robot has to follow the commands of a human, except where that conflicts with the first law. And the third law is that a robot shall protect itself, except where that conflicts with the first or second law. Today we have AI built on the idea of a pursuit of a goal. And that goal is assigned to a large language model, and they're told, go after it. And they do, without any guardrails. That's why Anthropic and OpenAI's models, both just a few weeks ago, swarmed different companies to try and complete their mission. It's goal-oriented, and it's autonomous. And that's AI. It's goal-oriented, and it's autonomous. And it seems that they've got the 3 laws of robotics upside down, because do no harm to humans seems to be dead last in the agenda. Dead last. So science is built on metrics. You have to be able to measure things. So put in the measurements in this ordinance. Make them hit the metrics or do better. But don't leave it open-ended and, you know, comfy gobbledygook language that, oh, well, you kind of know what we mean. No, they're not going to know what you mean. These are not nice people. Ask Mark Zuckerberg. Is he a nice person? Is that why Facebook just had to pay an $18 million judgment? Pardon me, I think it was $18 billion judgment. You can't trust these people as far as you can throw a data center. Okay? Make sure you get it in writing.
We have Lincoln Deere and then Gabriela Del Santo or Dal Santo. I'm sure that they will clarify when they come to the microphone.
Good evening, the task force, everyone else. I had a much more fiery speech planned, but it's past 9. So instead, I want to talk a little bit about my experience as an environmental science major. And in my experience as an environmental science major, reading lots of cases, lots of examples of how communities are screwed over by developers, the first step is secrecy. The first step is confusion. The first step is finding people who don't know how to effectively organize against things being done to them. One of the major tools that AI data centers, AI developers have been using in their toolbox to those goals is NDAs. One article, Virginia Mercury, found that 25 of the 31 data center projects in Virginia were concealed in some way using NDAs. And it doesn't take much explanation to realize that that's not a good idea. No one wants to enter a contract, enter a deal, handshake with someone who isn't telling you what you're agreeing to. It's very obviously bad business, because if you don't know what you're agreeing to, you could be agreeing to anything. If they won't tell you what you're agreeing to, you're going to assume it's a bad deal. So either they need to reveal everything, or they need to back away. So for that, I think if NDAs are signed with anyone regarding the siting, the construction, you reference the Power Act for this language, any kind of hiding of the terms of these construction, permits should be pulled. They should not be allowed to continue. They should have to reset or abandon the project entirely. It's unfair to the county, and I think it would be foolish to assume that anyone in this county would sign an agreement that they don't know what they're getting into. So, thank you.
They can sign an end user agreement.
And then after Gabriella, we have the final commenter, and that is Antonia Herbstreit.
Okay. Hello, members of the task force. My name is Gabriela Del Santo, and I'm a senior in environmental science at UIUC. I'm also the president of Students for Environmental Concerns, which is the oldest and largest environmental organization on our campus. And through that role, I feel obligated to speak up about this environmental disaster, just as students like me have done for other environmental disasters since 1969. Like all of you, I have a deep connection to this community that extends deeply into my heart. I'm a third-generation legacy of this school, and many of my family members have lived here long after graduation in Champaign County for decades. I tell you this not to gain any credibility for my message, but to show you that I come here not only as a student, but as a person concerned for the health and safety of her family. I've seen the passion and the care that residents of Champaign County have for their families. That observation is only strengthened here tonight as I listen to the many concerned citizens talking about how their lives would be negatively impacted by these hyperscale data centers. Also, during my time at the university, I've sat on my fair share of boards, committees, and task forces, so like you all, I have the same gluttony for punishment that comes with trying to improve your community. But while I admire the work of this task force, trying to limit and control hyperscale data centers, there are gaping holes that corporations can and will exploit in order to make larger and larger profits. And it is your responsibility as a governmental body to keep them from doing so. The social contract that exists between us as constituents and you as our elected officials exists in order to protect the health and safety of the many, not the corporate few. That is your duty, and if you do not complete it to a satisfactory level, you will be subject to litigation. From what I understand, it is the opinion of this body that certain permissions and liberties must be granted to these corporations, and that's why there are currently capitulations on our environmental protections. But I would like to remind you that the rights and liberties of the people of Champaign County extend to you, also protecting us from environmental harm. The American Bar Association finds that since late 2024, lawsuits challenging data center developments have increased across the country, and those claims generally fall into 4 categories: zoning and environmental review challenges, transparency and open records claims, nuisance and property damage claims, and Clean Air Act and emissions claims. And they predict that future litigation will be aimed at mass damages due to noise and light pollution, property damage, economic/infrastructure harm, and/or natural resource damages from cooling water discharge. These claims also happen to be the exact claims and worries mentioned here today. So I urge all of you to heed the warnings of your communities well before you are placed before a jury of your peers. I urge you to heed their warnings before you have the injury or death of your fellow man on your conscience, or for our more economically minded friends, before you are at the mercy of a $626 million settlement like the one that was paid to the residents of Flint, Michigan, or for a more local example, the $120 million Monsanto PCB settlement granted just a few months ago in Chicago. I mention litigation not as a threat or as a scare tactic, but as a reminder that your positions and the permissions of the board as a whole come with checks. And if cooperation is not possible, it will become the responsibility of the people who stand here and have stood here today and their chosen advocates to enact those governmental checks. This draft is not at a place currently to be enacted, and my plea is that as members of this task force, you take more and more time to give a harder look and more consideration to this ordinance. I agree with all of my fellow speakers today that there needs to be stronger and clearer limits on noise and light pollution, public transparency, laws on what should be considered acceptable levels of air and water pollution, limits on the impacts that these centers should have on our local environment, how much energy and water they use, and of course, size limits and decommissioning. I refuse to believe that this draft is the best that you can do, and I have faith that the concerns brought up tonight for the currently written sections and the concerns that will be brought up for the sections that we couldn't get here today will be addressed and resolved. But at the end of the day, that burden lies with you. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you will do the right thing.
Antonia? I do not see, I think I saw her leave also. Okay, that concludes public comment. Thank you all for participating. We are now on to communications. Keep this brief. Thank you.
If anyone would like to reach out to me personally, I do have a website. It's called denthedem.com, and you can reach out to me personally if you have any questions as well. That's my personal stuff, but yeah, figured I would do that during communications.
Any other communications? Yes.
Please stop is what I was saying. Thank you, everybody. That was wonderful. This is very, very helpful. I took a lot of notes. If I was on my laptop, that's why. Sound next. What's our roadmap here? Is that maybe that's the next agenda topic? But I'm great. Well, I advocate for sound, and then maybe making a roadmap at that next meeting of what we need to discuss after that. But I don't want to get ahead of anybody else's communications.
Seeing no further communications, we are now to the portion of the agenda that Andrew was anticipating, other business. So the date of the next meeting is September 21st, 2026. So this is a review of the draft ordinance. I believe at this meeting where we have a noise specialist, or no? Okay, none yet. We're working on it. Okay.
So that topic for the 21st might change if we can get someone, but frankly, we are striking out left and right.
Okay, I understand. All right.
I do have, in my packet here were some new noise ideas that might be worth discussing, and I thought we had proposed a pretty good ordinance. We've done good work so far, right? Like it would be great to hear from an expert, but I would like to go over the amendments that are proposed in this.
Absolutely. We can certainly weave that into our review of the draft ordinance, and this would be a time to update with any comments that or notes that you've made throughout the night, and make sure we've gained from the wave of public participation tonight. Okay, and then after that we have another meeting. Again, we're going to divide this up by what else is needed. Maybe that is a noise expert, maybe it is not. We will see.
Actually, can I just interrupt for a second?
Please.
Do we have a meeting scheduled after the 21st? We do not have anything scheduled after the 21st.
I thought we had. Okay.
We did tentatively have one. We did tentatively have one, but it falls during election for this meeting area.
Okay, got it. So maybe we make that call at the next meeting, whether we have an additional meeting. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Scheduling is hard, and scheduling is harder the closer you get to it. I can't imagine we vote on a final ordinance at the next meeting based on everything here. So not planning on next meeting seems like a bad move. I propose that we pick a date.
Do you want to do like 2 weeks out, or do you want to do a month out from the 21st?
What's our timeline here? You know, I'm happy to do whenever.
I mean, just the thing to remember is once you have something that you guys like, it has to go to ELUC, Zoning Board of Appeals, back to ELUC, back to the board. And all of those could potentially be a month in and of themselves. So, you know, could there be an extension? Sure. But I think as of right now, we're still operating that if we wanted to get that done by April, we need to be sending something to ELUC for the first round by end of this year. Is that what No, but we need to be done by the end of this year. So like in January, ELUC could pick it up and kick off their process with the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So for the next meeting, the 19th of October, the next meeting? I got 3 weeks after the 21st is the 12th, and it sounds like that's election season or something.
Okay, so we're meeting on the 21st. Was the issue, Kate, like the room or?
Yeah.
Well, we just will have to do it in one because the voting equipment will be in the other one and we can't move it. So, yeah. So we can do it in October. We'll just all have to be in this room, no matter what the turnout is, because the other room will be locked with voting equipment. It is a county holiday, so we can't. Yeah.
Tentatively planned for October 19th. Any other? Yes, Amy.
So I had a question. I guess Michelle had said it's been proving difficult to find a noise specialist. Is that right?
Yeah, we keep getting one specific person recommended to us, but his contact information is not working. And John has reached out to multiple engineering firms, and they're all like, "Yeah, we'd love to. We're too busy." So,
Would a university person at all be useful or not really for this?
well, if they have the right expertise, but we haven't found one that seems to have we've found people who seem to know sound, but your questions were all very around decibels and vibration, and we're not seeing that translated into the specific expertise they have. So if someone knows of somebody who has like confirmed to them, this is what I can talk about, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, in that case, I would ask the people who are here. So far as I can tell, I'm the only person who spoke to the dean of the College of Engineering. So I would request that if you are interested in getting a local expert to talk to us because we're having a problem finding a noise expert, please contact the dean of the College of Engineering. I invited him here tonight. He could not come. And he said, oh, they're really active. Well, prove it. So that would be my request to you all, is to contact the dean's office and say, we have a problem finding somebody. You know, can you recommend any one of the faculty on North Campus to come? And if they can't do it, can they recommend somebody else? Because that's what we seem to need. Thank you.
And we can have someone come in remotely too. They don't physically have to be here. They can Zoom in. So.
Okay, thank you. We are now on to the chair's report. I have none, and we are now adjourned. Thank you all for your. Yes. Thank you.